a good positive question you'd like to ask Karen about her experience of leadership at First Wilkesboro.
I have several questions, and I really appreciated what transpired, Karen. When you redirected the folks to trying to capture the goodness that was in the past and bringing it forward to the future, how did that go? Were people able to engage with you there, or were they still just in deep grief and not ready to think like that?
It was a struggle to get them to think like that. At first, there was just so much anxiety, I guess you will. Anytime a church faces a potential split like ours was facing, there was just a lot of anxiety. But then once I got them to talking about the good old days and the glory days, when there was more unity and stuff, it was a little easier to then open the conversation of, okay, so what are the barriers? What are you feeling that the barrier is to us getting there again? And once we just started talking our way through that, they began to see that those obstacles weren't as great as they thought they were. And so that's where the conversation began to turn and to shift a little bit. And they began to see that that even though things were very different now, it didn't mean we couldn't hold on to those core values they had once had. But it took us several months probably. and even the day of the event, there were people who weren't convinced of it. But they came around.
So my follow-up question, I think, is much more of an appreciative question, similar to, in vein with what you just said. How can we honor the memory of those we've lost with ministry?
Good question. We do a lot of kind of lifting that up as we develop new ministries. We tend to bring in those stories and say, remember when Miss Annie established this fund, and here's why she did it, and we kind of move from there. So there's kind of a conscious effort at all times to kind of pull the saints of the past into the saints of the future, because tradition is kind of important to them here in that way. So we do a lot of things like that. A lot of, just on Easter Sunday, as a matter of fact, honored a lady who had passed last year that really had led our church in worship and did a lot of beautiful things. And so we found a way to honor her on Easter Sunday when her family was present. And just different things like that of constantly showing us that our past holds value in our present, and it will in our future as well. So I'm not sure if that answers your question, but
No, it does. It does very much. And I love what you're doing, because I find that so often the hiccup is we want to find ways to remember and what was good, and feel the anxiety of we're just changing things. We're just moving on from and we're not, to find ways to honor those who've gone before us and stand on their shoulders to reach new heights, I think is part of that healing process that you're living into. So I love what you said. I mean, every time a new ministry comes up, you try to find an anchor to the saint of old who has inspired this thing, and maybe it's evolved to this, but it's still in that same spirit as the one who first gave us the idea. So I think that's wonderful. Similar to all of that, could we find a way to celebrate those that we've lost, not through death, but just through the loss, similar to what we do with All Saints Sunday, without it being ugly?
Yeah. That's a good point. I don't know that we've done that. Thinking about it's a very unique situation in here, in that many that we've lost are not actually lost, if that makes sense. They've disengaged from worship, but they're still engaged in the periphery. It was mostly our youth volunteers and our youth, um, a big hunk of our youth um, that disengaged, and they're still very active in the youth ministry. They just don't want to be. They're kind of standing back on the fringes, waiting to see what happens elsewhere. So it's been a unique kind of situation, which we haven't completely lost. We only lost maybe, I think two people withdrew their membership. Other than that, no one has officially left. Just pulled aside, if that makes sense.
It does. It does.
Good. Elaine, have you got a question?
I got a chance to talk to Karen about this some because we've been partners in our,
Yeah.
I don't remember what it's called, but the thing where we're together. So, but one of the things that I was listening this morning, Steve knows this, but the others of you may not know. My dad died a year ago, almost exactly. And my mom had a really major surgery in October. And it's been a year for me personally and my family for like, grief is really real and it feels really heavy. And if you want to be all positive about like what's going to happen next and let's not get stuck in that, that's like not, I'm very aware that that's not a helpful stance to someone actively grieving. And so I was interested in the ways that you are both honoring that, but also not letting it define where we are now, or more importantly, what our future possibilities are. I'm wondering, I don't know if you've noticed or not, but as you're doing sort of congregational pastoral care around congregational grief, what are you learning or practicing about how that intersects with the more individual or life circumstance grief that you or others are experiencing in your congregation?
More on a personal level, is that what you're asking me?
Yeah, I mean, I'm just wondering, it seems like you've done some really good work with the congregation as like, yes, we're experiencing this grief. We're not going to pretend it's not there. We're going to work with it, but we're also going to look at what are healthy ways to move through that. So that's not the only thing for us. And I guess I personally realized that that's a journey I'm on.
Right.
Based on my life circumstances. And I'm just wondering if you've gained wisdom or felt like you had ways that really good work congregationally grief wise informs how you approach individuals or families in grief.
Yeah. I think it kind of ties with the same answer I gave earlier. For those who bothered to stay and let me engage with them individually, we've made really good progress in that as well. To be able to sit down and say, look, I acknowledge that this sucks. I acknowledge that it hurts. They lost an associate pastor they had for 17 years. For many of them, it was the only consistent pastor they had ever known. I understand that. And so for those who bothered to stay and let me give voice to that, we're fine. And but there was a lot of that individual work of, I understand your grief. They needed me to be able to say that I wasn't personally offended or bothered by them grieving the loss of that other pastor.
Yeah.
They've needed to see me that I'm okay, that he comes back for funerals and weddings, and I know over time that's going to diminish, but for this first year or so, it's kind of a necessary thing, and so it was important to them to see that we could still have a good relationship and still be colleagues and still, so those kinds of things mattered. That's not been as easy for the people who who were angry with me and who have stayed on the periphery and just don't
Yeah.
want to be a pastor.
Right.
So all I can do is work with the people who are willing to work with me, and have hope that the rest who are hanging in the periphery will eventually step back in. So one of the things I decided actually yesterday is that usually our youth and these folks that are on the periphery, they are there on Wednesday nights,
Uh-huh.
6 to 8. And that happens to be the same time I always do an adult Bible study. So so yesterday I canceled my adult Bible study, and my plan is for the next 3 months to go hang out with the youth
Mm-hmm.
and those people, because that is the only place I'm going to be able to connect with them
Uh,
on that personal level, because they're not going to come back to worship until they see me as their pastor. So um, so I'm going after them that way, and we'll see what happens.
good.
Karen, how are you able to navigate all this, your own loss, your own grief, your own frustration, and also the compassion capacity, so that when someone is in a different stage of grief than you are, and they bring you back into their place, and you've already worked through that spot, because that's a struggle for me in a congregation's grief setting wise. So I'm just curious, how are you able to navigate those waters and stay in a place where it's healthy?
I am really blessed in a couple of ways. One is my husband is a pastor as well, so he's able to, when I come home frustrated that I've got pulled back into a different level of grief, he's able to say, "Hold on, let's look at this differently." I have a great accountability group of area pastors that we're able to talk about these things with as well. Um, and I journal, and so I tend to make a lot of lists in my journal about. I can go back and remind myself why we made the decisions we made, how I've worked through my own grief process. And sometimes when I feel I'm being pulled back into it, I just sit down and reread those pages to remind myself, that I got to a different level. It took me time to get there, and it's going to take them time to get there. And there are moments, I had one a couple weeks ago where I got really frustrated with somebody that just did not want to move forward, and she was just spreading rumors and doing stuff, and I was really frustrated and starting to get a little angry about it. And then somehow someone convinced her to just come and talk to me. We had the best conversation, and it's completely changed our relationship around. So so I just try and journal all those things so I can go back and read them and remind myself there is hope.
Yes, thank you.
So Karen, one of the things I have a question about is a little more detail about, you just described one way, canceling your Bible studies so that you can go and be present with the youth and engage them in these kinds of conversations,
Mm-hmm.
because you don't have access to them any other way. What are some of the places, and some of the hows that you started these conversations and moved them towards figuring out, what is it that we're going to recover and reclaim, as a church?
Are you asking where those conversations have taken place, or
How did you decide where to have those, and how and when you needed to do that?
I started initially having those conversations in committee meetings, whenever I would get people gathered together, and they weren't quite progressing as well as I had hoped. So so I started opening up my home, and we started moving committee meetings to my dining room table.
Oh,
And I would cook, they would bring side dishes or desserts or whatever. And so once or twice a month, I would have, 8 to 12 people gathered around my my dining room table, and the conversations there are so different than the conversations that happen in a classroom or a meeting space at church. There's a relaxed quality, and you get more of a family discussion instead of an institutional discussion.
Mm-hmm.
And so much of the progress we have made has happened around, there's power around the table. And so there was something, I think it broke down barriers to be invitational, to say, come into my home. And I invite you into my personal space to be able to do some of this work. And it just changed the conversation completely.
Yeah, I can see.
How are you planting that seed of invitational and vulnerability to the other church members? Are you seeing them also becoming more open to having folks over to their homes? Because you're onto something.
Yeah, not yet. But that's kind of, my husband and I were discussing this last night, because he's getting ready to do the same thing with his church. So our table is going to get pretty full pretty quick. And so we were trying to figure out, how do we maybe gently nudge some folks to say, who would like to host next time, or, that sort of thing. So, and I think now that I've kind of had, I think I've been doing this about 4 or 5 months now. And I think now that we've kind of set the stage for it, it'll be a little bit easier for me to then start introducing this concept of life groups and small groups and things, because we've had quite a few people around that table now, and kind of being able to establish that model for that. So that's my goal by the end of the year, is to kind of start getting that table to expand a little bit to other locations.
Good. So another question I have is you talked about some of the practice of celebration, and Kent was highlighting the practice in All Saints Day, where we celebrate everyone who's died. But how do you choose? What's your practice that allows you to choose who and what to celebrate? How do you do that?
Huh. Not really sure I've had a method for that.
Yeah.
That's a good question. I think one of the things in kind of gathering with my staff and thinking about where our next movement is taking us, the natural conversation seems to come in. Well, here's how we've gotten to this point. And now we know we need to get to another point. So, and then we take those stories. We're a big story church. We like having stories. So we like to build off those stories. So I think that's really been kind of our guiding thing, is that, well, we look back at that story, that was a reason to celebrate. Now here's why it's still a reason to celebrate. And then we got this goal on what we'll be celebrating next because of what happened over there. So we try and keep that progression going as much as possible.
How are you able to share the stories beyond just the group that's gathered? Because you said there's those people on the periphery that aren't going to engage. So how can you take those stories and share them even broader?
Yeah, that's the big question. We try and put I try and write about them in my newsletter articles and things like that, but I don't think anybody reads those. We just try and kind of keep it in the open anytime we do gather Wednesday night meals or whatever. But that's really part of the reason I'm canceling the Bible study and going to that periphery, because I don't think they are getting it. Yeah. It made me realize right before Easter that even though it's been moving towards 2 years now when all of this division happened, I'm still hearing the same rumors. I'm still hearing the same complaints. That come out of that peripheral group. And I thought, so it stopped everywhere else except there. So that's when I realized they're not getting the message. They're not getting the stories. They're not getting the movement forward, and they're not going to until they're engaged in some way. And this is the only way I can figure out how to engage them, because they push me away everywhere else.
So I'm hearing what you're saying about, that folks on the periphery are still not getting the message, but that something's different about the folks and the stories that are being told inside the church. So talk to us about what's different. What are the positive things that you're seeing inside the church that are the signs that you're looking for folks that are on the periphery?
So I have two things that stick out in my mind about that. My vision when all of this kind of everything started falling apart was a church that was that celebrated being multi-generational, because one of the problems we had before is everybody was segmented into their age groups, and they never crossed paths ever. And I knew that wasn't their heritage, and I knew that it wasn't healthy, and I knew it wasn't it just wasn't right for us, and that was a source of big frustration. So I had this vision of celebrating being multi-generational, and I had this vision of being unified again, because we have two services. They had adopted a narrative that the two services hated each other, that they didn't want to be one church. There was all these, and they had this narrative that did not play out in reality, and yet they kept telling that story. So I had two goals: celebrate the multi-generational and help them see that was a false narrative. And so two things that have happened since then is that most of the folks that pulled out to the periphery came from my early service, which was the more blended service. And so I went down from a huge praise team down to basically one family. I got three people, who sing, and a piano player. That's all I've got left. And they bought into this narrative of the later service hates us. They don't like what we do. Now all of my praise team singers also sing in my chancel choir at the 11 o'clock service, because I just kept pulling them together, and now they all love each other. And so my praise team now sticks around long enough to sing the anthem at the 11 o'clock service before they leave. So that's been beautiful to watch. It's been beautiful to see. The first Wednesday night, they walked into choir practice, and the whole choir was like, "Oh my gosh, are you going to join us?" They were so excited, and it's just been a beautiful thing. And then the other thing that happened was one of my youth that goes to the early service stuck around one day for some reason, and one of my older, let's kindly say, well, that's not kind to call her crabby, but she's a little crabby lady from our 11 o'clock service came walking in, and this young man who I didn't even knew who she was comes running from the back of the sanctuary, 14-year-old boy running from the back of the sanctuary, and he throws his arms around this woman, and she was so startled she kind of fell back. He had to catch her, and she's like, "What are you doing?" And he said, "I'm giving you a hug." And she's like, "Why?" And he said, "Because I haven't seen you in a while and I missed you." And she just beamed. I mean, she never smiles, and she was just beaming. And I thought, I stepped out and cried for a little bit, because I was like, that's what I was hoping for. So it is changing.
Yeah.
It's taken us a while to get there.
Yeah. So what has to be the case about you so that you can maintain an open posture with folks who have kind of been chronically irritated, telling stories that are discouraging and things like that are on the periphery?
Yeah, I think Kent's question kind of set that up in knowing that I have just got to be constantly aware that I am not in the same place as they are, and it doesn't It doesn't make them wrong. It just makes their reality a little different than mine. And so, you know, just a couple weeks ago when I was able to sit down with that lady who had been, you know, spreading some rumors, and to be able to just sit down and say, why did you believe this? Why did you think that? And then we could trace it back to see where the misunderstanding was and kind of fix that. So that's really what I'm after, is more of those conversations of, you know, why do you keep saying, you know, what is it that about our current situation that makes you believe this is the case? You know, so, and to hear, you know, to hear what they want more of. I think these appreciative inquiry questions are going to be really important as I start to engage that periphery, that group that's on the periphery. Is, you know, what are you wanting more of? Because it can't be more of the associate pastor that's now been gone for 2 years. We've got to move past that.
Yeah.
So I'm looking forward to being able to do that.
That's a great segue into, you know, moving towards a, you know, a bit of dreaming. So as you think about where you're at right now, what is it that you're wanting more of? And Kent, you and Elaine can participate in this too, both with questions and with, you know, as you've listened to Karen and the description of what's happening with her and her church, you know, what are you finding yourself wanting more of in your setting?
I would love more of the healing to spread from the people who are receptive to my care, to Karen's care, so that they're engaged and they're using their influence with the folks who are still hurting, so that grief can be shared, but also joy can be shared, and healing can transform these relationships. I want more of that positive energy that Karen's created to be given away to the people who have been receptive, so they can then become the ones who give it away to those on the periphery. If that makes any sense at all, that's what I want more of.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. And I think that pretty well sums up what I want more of as well. And I think that's part of the frustration, is that this group has created this narrative of it's us against them, and so they've pulled so far that they're so far out that they can't even get that influence of the positive things that are happening. They honestly have no idea. So yeah, that's what prompted my decision to to go in. I'm going in the deep end.
So let's explore that more of, because you said somebody was a catalyst for the conversation that you had that changed. Tell us about that person who was the catalyst for that.
I don't know who it was, honestly, but I'm suspecting, because this happened on a Wednesday night. The youth group was preparing a meal as a fundraiser. And when I walked in, there was a lot of tension between the family that has stayed engaged, who now they lead our youth group. And it's the same family that has joined the 11 o'clock choir. And, you know, they're kind of becoming our leaders for that early service. And I could see when I walked in, they were really upset over something. And so their two teenage children had walked into the kitchen as this person was saying something very ugly about me. And it stopped her. And then she said, "Look, I know you love her, but here's why I don't." And then about 20 minutes later, she came up to me out in the hallway and said, I need to apologize to you. I've been very angry and I haven't talked to you about it, and we probably need to talk. So I don't know if it was getting caught by the youth that prompted her to do it on her own, or if another adult in the room after the youth left said to her, "You really need to be talking to Karen about this." I'm not sure what prompted it. Nobody else has shared that with me, and I didn't ask her. But
okay. So that's an example of of somebody having influence in a way that you don't know yet how that happened,
Right.
but something prompted her, and it was an encounter, an engagement, or a, just an observation of another person, of her not being her best self.
Yeah.
That,
Yeah.
that
And
prompted it.
interestingly enough, the associate pastor that had left was there that night. He was in the kitchen as well. So I'm hoping he's the one that prompted it, but I haven't asked yet. So,
Well, that would be a good thing.
yeah, it would be a good thing.
Elaine, what are you wanting more of? You're familiar with Karen's story since she's been your partner.
Yeah. Karen has been so incredibly tenacious. Like, she has just stuck with, like, being totally committed to, she mentioned what her vision was. And, like, it looks to me like when she had that vision, there wasn't much evidence that that was in the works. There wasn't much, like, here are the other people who are carrying this vision as well. And she has had so much sort of tenacity and resilience around, like, I have to believe that it's both her and Holy Spirit sort of working together of, like, no, this really is the truest vision for what this can be, and just really tenacious about sticking with it. I think
Thank you for calling
it's
it
so
tonight.
easy for us to get discouraged or stop somewhere along the route. And so the tenacity that she's shown in the congregations that's come around that with her, I'm just in awe. I would love for me
more
and for our
tenacity.
world to have more of that.
Thank you for calling it tenacity and not stubbornness. But my husband
You
would
know,
stubbornness.
we often need some of both to get things done. It's
That's
good.
right.
All right, so so why don't we take a 2-minute break? You step up, step around the corner, do whatever you need to do, and then we'll come back together, and we're going to continue this conversation and start talking a little bit about design, and how do we what would we want to do or lead or pray for in our setting in order to have more of that stuff that we're looking for, of multi-level participation in the healing of a congregation. All right, so I'm going to pause and we'll step away for just a couple of minutes.
Right.
So Karen, you mentioned in your exploration, the accountability group you're a part of. Talk about the role that group plays in your ability to, kind of maintain that tenaciousness that has allowed you to, to stay on the same track, through 2 years of really challenging work.
Yeah. I'm so blessed by this group of folks. We have, it's myself and my husband, so the two Methodists, and then we have a Baptist pastor, a Episcopalian priest, and a non-denominational pastor, and we just really have developed a very close bond. We do a joint did our first joint Easter sunrise service together this year. We meet once a week for coffee and to just chat, and then we text constantly with one another. So just having those words of encouragement, having people to pray, if one of us is having a weak moment, or that moment where we're ready to kind of just give up and think this isn't worth it anymore, there's always somebody in that group to step up and remind me, or we remind each other of why we're here and why we need to keep going and why it matters. And so those prayers, we text prayers back and forth to each other. We're just have developed a close bond in our ministry. So we know when somebody's going to have trouble with a staff member this week, we're going to reach out and really offer them encouragement for that. So that's that really helps a lot. That tenacity when you know that there's somebody that's going to ask you about it, and there's somebody that's going to have that expectation that you're going to keep moving forward and not fall back. So that accountability.
How did that group get started?
We got started actually right after, I can't even remember now which is sad commentary, but it was after one of the school shootings. I've only been at my church for 3 years, but I'm the senior of this group as far as ministry in Wilkesboro. They all came either right after me or, and so right at the week of that, one of those school shootings, the Episcopal Church had gotten a new priest, and I had just met her and given her my number. And when that shooting happened, she texted me and she said, this could be our community at any moment. And we need to make sure that we have some ministers that are going to be ready to respond to any tragedy. We need to be able to pull together who can we connect with. And so we just all started pulling names, and I sent out an email and I said, we're going to meet at a local coffee shop, and we're going to be having these discussions and talking about our community and how together we can best serve. So she kind of prompted it, and then I sent out the emails, and then those the 5 of us are the ones that responded, and we've been together ever since. So
fantastic. That's great.
Yeah.
All right. So as you think about what you want more of, and I've heard a couple of things. One is for other laity, other leaders in the church, to behave more in the ways that Karen has exemplified, which include tenacity, focus on what we're trying to be and do as the church, healing, openness to people who are on the periphery, who are hurt and grieving, learning to develop the capacity to recognize that that they haven't moved along like we have, and that their stories are different than the stories we're telling. So there are many other things that having an accountability group that holds you, keeps you focused and moves forward. So as you think about all of that you want to see develop and grow and become more robust and happening among the body, what are some steps that you imagine might take you in that direction?
I think it gets us there, though it's maybe a tangent. During the break, I had the idea, what if we were to have story night where we shared lessons I learned from my grandmother or from the saint of the church, and just let everybody kind of have a chance to tell those stories. Obviously, got to keep it away from becoming a roast. And my hope is that some common threads would come out and some connections would then start to be, because so-and-so also influenced me in these ways, or my grandmother also influenced me and told me that same rule of life that still impacted me. And what if we had a more focused story night where we were talking about those lessons we learned from those who have been influential to us in the past, whether they're in immediate family or from the community of faith?
I love that idea.
Yeah, that sounds very promising. You had an open mic night at your picnic. How did that compare to what Kit's describing?
I was just thinking as I wrote a note as he was describing that, because our open mic night was just only one person actually participated. She came, sang a couple of songs, but I mean, we got a bonfire there. How much more powerful would story night be with that, to be able to share around the fire, those exactly those kinds of stories that Kent's describing, I think would be phenomenal. Because we did very intentionally craft that night to be a youth oriented event, so those periphery people would be there. So yeah, we're gonna do that again this fall, but definitely story time is gonna be part of it now, because they need to be able to hear. We all need to be able to hear that from each other. So thank you, Kent. That's a perfect idea. Perfect.
Stories that make us who we are.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. That's a great insight. What other steps do you see as possible that would move towards more of that robust engagement of healing and focused, direction for the church?
I would also love to see the family that has joined the 11 o'clock choir be given opportunities to lead at 11, and or the 11 o'clock choir investing in the early service and what that family is trying to do. Again, trying to maximize that influence of those folks that you've been influential with, so that the value of what they do and what they bring is shared and acknowledged.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would love to see more of that as well. We did try that a couple of weeks ago, of having we used to part of the complication was that we used to have two music directors. We had one for 11 o'clock, one for 9 o'clock, and the one at the 9 o'clock is really the one that kind of started that narrative that the one at the 11 hated them, and so it's been ugly. So we have been back actually on Palm Sunday, had the 11 o'clock music director come into the 9 o'clock service and participate in the service, so that they could see his head was not going to explode to have to do a different style of worship, and he handled it really well. And so we are trying to make some of those steps, but it's been a bit slower of a process there. But
When he participated, did he just participate, or did he also influence and lead?
We actually co-preached a sermon together.
Okay.
So that's pretty much the extent of his
Excellent.
his involvement that day. But we're hoping to make some changes in that service and maybe get him a little more involved as well. But we also have a lot of choir members that I think would do it as well too. So that's a good idea, good insight.
So one of the churches that I work with, their pastor is a church that has multiple preachers. We talked about them early on in the adaptive discipleship. But the purpose of that was so that people heard from folks that were like them. So I wonder, since the youth are still, the periphery people are still active with the youth, how might you invite them to be storytellers of things that shaped them? So they're invited, even if it's in the youth, so that they're invited to share the positive stories that they have out loud, calling to remembrance, the influential people who shaped them.
Are you talking about the adults on the periphery or the youth?
Well, both, but anybody who's on the periphery. How do you help them hear a voice that's like them, so that they have something else to think about rather than just the loss and the grief of
Yeah, that's
that sounds scary.
point. That's the one I'm not sure about. And
Yeah.
I don't, because I think part of the reason I don't know how to answer that is because there's such a distance between me and them that I really don't even know I'm really not even sure, other than the rumors that I hear that come from them. I'm really not even sure where they are right now. So
Yeah.
it's hard for me to kind of figure out even what stories they need to hear, or what stories need to be told. So that's another reason I'm going in on Wednesday nights and starting to just hang out, because I need to hear the stories they're telling.
Yeah.
I
So
need to be the listener for a while instead of the storyteller.
yeah, so they may not be ready for that, and you may not be ready for it either, but so there's a great book by Dwayne Elmer. It's uh, cross-cultural servanthood. Cross-cultural servanthood. It's a book written, by a missionary for missionaries. But one of the things he has in that book that I think is really helpful is when you're in a setting where people are at odds with each other, it has a lot of similarities to being in a cross-cultural setting. And as a matter of fact, all ministry is cross-cultural these days. Intergenerational cultures, regional cultures, socioeconomic cultures, along with ethnic and other cultural distances that we're kind of accustomed to. But he has this, he calls it the path towards servanthood, and the different steps along the way and that build on each other. And the first step is openness. Uh, uh, and what I'm hearing you doing is taking a step of openness by freeing up your schedule, getting out of the comfortable place of teaching your class on Wednesday night and going to an uncomfortable place of being open and present with people who have been telling stories about you that you'd rather them not tell. And so you're taking that first step. So it might be helpful for you. I'll send you the list of the steps. But openness, acceptance, trust, learning, understanding. These are the kinds of things that he talks about. So acceptance means more than openness. That you have an opportunity to genuinely accept somebody
Right.
as another human being, which what happens when we're at odds with people is that we tend to objectify the people we're at odds with, and they become not the whole human being, but they become that thing that we're angry with them about.
Yeah.
Kind of like whenever somebody has cancer, they become the person with cancer rather than that whole human being they were before.
Mm-hmm.
And they're known for their cancer rather than for their identity as a human being. Same thing with this. So acceptance is about allowing ourselves to see the other as a whole human being and to acknowledge their humanity.
Yeah.
So that's part of the process that you're going to engage in, I think, whenever you are working that Wednesday nights, right?
Oh yeah.
Being engaging with them as other human beings with stories and lives and interests and griefs, but also joys and celebrations, because they're just not all about the associate pastor anymore. That may be the thing that's objectifying the two of you with each other,
Mm-hmm.
but they're about a whole lot more than that, and so are you.
Yeah.
Anyway, I'll send you
So
that list.
Okay. Thank you.
Will
I
you
hate
send
to.
it to all of us?
Of course,
Thank you.
I promise to share. It'll be in the Slack space.
Lovely.
So, Steve, I don't know if you want to send me the survey, because I'm gonna have to fuss, because this has been one of the best cohort meetings we've had, and I've got to slip out early, and I'm sad about all of that because I really have enjoyed what we're doing.
Yeah, the survey's in the Slack space under let's see, where did I put that? Under discussion.
All right. Well, my number one recommendation is start here next time, because this has been a great conversation. Thank y'all both very much for allowing me to be a part of this. And Karen, I'm very excited about what is happening. I got some more ideas. I don't know if they're any good or not, but I would love to follow up a little bit. So I'll figure out how to reach out to you in the days ahead. And best of luck to you, because something good is happening. I can sense that, and even more is coming. So stay tenacious.
Thank you. And I was going to say, please do reach out, because I love your ideas. I want to hear more.